Hi, this is John Shribs and welcome to my garden. Welcome to my house where I've redone the lawn over 10 years ago with the mulch program, and now I've turned it all into entirely native plants since then. So right up front, right here in the front corner, you can see some sage plants that are blooming like crazy, and one of the big advantages is the level of insects that you see over it. And I'm not sure if you can see some of the bees. There's lots of native bumblebees floating around here on the bush. I can hear them in the background. I'm not sure if you can hear. Okay. Now I added these rocks. I actually picked these up. They were in looked like a junk pile of rocks by the side of a road up there in the mountains. There was they had cleared some stuff out. But since I saw all these rocks on the side of the road, just kind of begging to be used, beautiful, gorgeous little shales, so I selected these out of this junk pile, and I was able to bring them back and put them in the garden. So that ended up pretty nice. I've got this other smaller plants, flowering plants, from these yarrow that's in the front here. That's a white flowering native plant. We also have penstemon coming along. Shasta Daisy here, actually done by the Luther Burbank, and our calendulas, which we're growing in the red pot, you'll see a little bit later, spread by seed, and every year I still get calendula coming up, nice color, so I just kind of left them in there. I have a Oregon grape that I transplanted because I was not doing well over in the shady area of the garden, so I moved over to the sunny part, so hopefully it will take off. And then some of the yellow flowers that you see here, that is California poppy, but it's the coastal variety, which is not your standard inland orange variety. It's a lot yellower and is not as invasive and not as spreading as the golden poppy. And it's a lot brighter colored, and I like it a lot better. We also have some coastal Sea Daisies here. And here we have some purple needlegrass. And it just gives a little texture to the landscape, and it's a native, and it seeds itself every year. The sunflower, California native, small plant, it's really good for borders, has nice beautiful sunflower, yellow flower on it that bees and insects love. There's another sage that we have here, and this is a snowberry. Forms nice little white berries on it, and it's been propagated mostly through clonal, and hard to get the seeds to germinate on this plant. And I've got blue-eyed grass, which is now flowering. More calendulas that just keeps self-seeding and popping up. And then I come along with some woodland strawberries I recently planted. Then up here in this area, here's the pot that originated with the calendulas that I just put some flowers in, because my wife really likes to have beautiful color all the time, so that just completely gets changed out as needed, so there's always some color in there all the time. But right behind that, I've got some down here, get it in the shade so you can see it better. Okay, I got some Ceanothus, the creeping varieties. I've got another Oregon grape, followed up by a flowering currant, where the other 9 bark was doing not so well back here. I got 9 bark here, and I've got on this side, this one is going to be your coffee berry, and then your toyon is over here. The toyon and coffee berry are quite old now. They're like almost 10 years, not growing very well, so not doing well in the shady spot of this garden. But doing much better. We have twinberry that's doing really well. That's flowering right now in yellow. I'll get a little closer so you can see what those flowers look like. And they form really nice black double twin berries on the plants when I'm all done. Okay, and then behind that, I've got a red stem dogwood that just takes off and grows like crazy back here, and I have to completely prune it back every year. Okay, coming from this side of the front yard, coming in, as you can see in the front, here's some mugwort starting up. And then next to it, you've got some Juncus coming in. Not the Juncus patens, it's the lighter green variety of Juncus that we have in here. And then I've got a Kerry Bush, but not your normal inland type. This is a coastal variety. It's dwarf, and it's also tends to be small and rounded. But I went and have done some like Japanese pruning on it, and so I'd love to see the strange little stems growing all over the place. It forms a nice sometimes habitat internally, so you can see what's going on inside the bush. So I've done that also for a couple of the others. There's one in the background there that I keep it well rounded but airy looking instead of just one big ball. And same thing with this one over here. So I just happen to like it to look a little bit on the wild side because I love those trunks as much as I do the leaves. Here's another California, one of the fuchsias here that's growing really well. And then behind it, I've got a sage plant that looks a little scraggly, but in there, right in there, I've just planted in a Matia poppy, and that's going to be a very large bush with lots of white big flowers on it here in the next couple years. And then another Grindelia back there, and another couple sage, particularly I've got Fragrant Sage here, and it is, I got like 3 or 4 of these plants in the front, and this Fragrant Sage will come up, and it's like a blast of fresh air that you get coming in and out of the house when the wind's blowing just enough to kind of, and it's like aromatherapy for us coming in and out of the house. I've got deer grass back here, and it's a little bit shady, so it's not growing as well as it is in some of the sunnier spots. Again, with some California fuchsia in here, and buried underneath there somewhere is going to be some smaller manzanitas that's supposed to be forming a very large mat, but they're very slow growing right here. And then back in here, you can see I've got my California Aster, and it started off as 2 or 3 plants. It's now a complete bed, and I have to keep cutting it back and keeping it contained. So that's the hard part. And you can even see it is in here. It's starting to grow all underneath, everything underneath. And so I'm going to have to keep pulling that back. And of course, we've got the oak trees. So I have a black oak, eastern black oak in the front here, and its acorns drop, and I have to be pulling out small oak trees constantly. However, California Aster is a great insect beneficial plant, and there's lots of lepidopterans, a lot of that feed on it, on the leaves, which are essential for the birds. And a recent lecture I just heard says that most of the birds have to have caterpillars to feed the young, and that really, and this plant, Aster, California Aster, is a wonderful plant for providing food for the worms, for the caterpillars, and the caterpillars feed the birds. So it's really essential for the native wildlife. This whole concept is a pretty amazing concept, that we need to feed the insects that feed the birds. Okay, besides getting this native plant garden using the sheet mulching earlier on, I did put in a couple different things in the very front here. One was salt grass, which is the native grass, but it was a bit scraggly looking and looked always a little bit unkempt. So that is, as of a request from my wife, we decided, okay, we'll change that up. So I completely dug it out, found the old irrigation, tapped in underneath the sidewalk from the corner down here, across the sidewalk, went underneath, digging a hole with a very long, thin, tiny shovel, and was able to tap into the old irrigation, which is broken because the oak trees completely ripped apart the old street tree irrigation system. I tapped into it, and now I can have water to some new street trees. They're going to be smaller crepe myrtles, which are good for bees. I'm putting lavender, good for bees and other insects. And then there's going to be about 30 small little plants, for California natives from Calflora locally. And they're going to be similar to what I already have along this edge. And so I'm going to fill this whole edge up. Probably this next week is going to be completely full of flowering natives. one of the things just a few days ago, I had about 10,000 swarm bees come to my bee trap up here. I'm also a beekeeper, and I collect the bees every year, and I get anywhere from 2 to 3 bee swarms every year in my traps. Okay, here's 2 pine trees, and they're still alive, doing well. And up here I have 2 more bee traps, and I've gotten another swarm here just a couple days ago. And again, I get 2 to 3 bee swarms every year coming to my 3 traps here in the front of my house, and then I deliver them to other beekeepers in the area here. It seems to be a favorite spot for bee swarming. And then down here we have a community strip, and it comes all the way down the street here, and this is a community area paid for through a landscape assessment district. And these pine trees here are getting a little on the older side, and there's a couple trees. I'm not sure if there's one down the street here, but there's one up there that you can see the branches are dying back, and so every year we get one of these trees to die. And there used to be about 6 or 7 trees coming down this whole strip. They all died from the drought and the pine bark beetle, and so I've replaced those with coast redwoods, and then a few other trees I've put in because I had a native plant nursery a few years ago. So now we've got also, besides the redwoods, we've got some white alder here, and I've got some Oregon ash in the background there. I've got, this is a larger bush. It doesn't look like much now, but it comes out a really beautiful red flower. This is Spicebush there. And then coming up taller is an oak tree that just came up naturally because we have oak trees in the area, and birds and squirrels put seeds in the ground, and they come up, and so I've let this one grow up naturally. And then down here we have a small, actually a large bush in between these 2 redwoods I planted maybe 10 years ago. It was doing better before, but it's being shaded out by the redwoods here. This is called silk tassel, I think a shrub that could be used a lot more in our landscapes. It's beautiful, and it has these beautiful silk tassels coming down from it that just hang in there and just look gorgeous, especially when it's a nice round large shrub. But right now it's completely getting overwhelmed by the redwood trees. Then I planted a coyote bush, just a standard coyote bush, kind of a roundish thing that's all over our hillsides, one of the most prolific native shrubs in the area. And it's a light green, and bees love this, especially. It's wonderful food for bees in November. And then coming through the shrubs, as we come down here, we've got various things. So I got toyon, some more spicebush, more coyote bush, another oak tree. This one I think I planted rather than coming up from seed. Some manzanita, some of the larger, mid-sized to larger variety in here, but growing well with beautiful little dark bark that shows up. I need to plant that probably a little further back, find a new place for it. And I've got California fuchsia. Here's another toyon that's sort of like in the middle of it, and fuchsias takes out those beautiful red flowers all summer long. They're just about to start blooming here shortly, and it frames a nice steady bed here. And pretty much once I've got it fully weeded, it tends to be competitive, and so this seems to be a nice spot, and this will be a red orange all summer long, starting in about a few weeks. And I've got more twinberry in the front here, as well as another larger manzanita, and this is the one I need to probably prune back. And then we have one of the California fuchsias here, nice red flowers, and hummingbirds love this plant. We got a little bit of 9 bark in there. We've got some Texas tea, California tea, and this was another plant that you will not find in any normal nursery, but this plant will self-root and come up from the roots, come up from seeds, and so it keeps coming back year after year. We can push it back. It's a lovely, lovely green, and you can make tea out of it. It's not that good tasting, but the leaves you can make tea out of. That's why it's called California tea. And then it comes through here, and we have a couple more other like sage-like plant and Epilobiums and California Fuchsias coming in. And then one more native I have in the front here, and this is redbud. This is actually California redbud compared to the Texas redbud and the Oklahoma redbuds, which are tree forms. This is more of a bush form for the California redbud. And this native coast live oak is the #1 species that provides a huge amount of food for the insects, particularly the moths and butterflies in the caterpillar form. There's over 100 species apparently of moths and butterflies, caterpillars that feed on the oak tree, or will feed on it and then drop to the ground in the leaf litter. So having oak trees with leaf litter underground for the insects to live, and then the birds come along and they eat pupa in the ground, they eat the caterpillars in the leaves, and it's really essential for bird life to have these caterpillars and pupa food available to them. And this coast live oak is like the #1 local species. We need to have as many of these as possible in our immediate urban landscape. In the front area on this side of the house, there was some standard landscape materials that were put in, and I've had to pull some of that out and replace it. This Raphiolepis that is 30 years old. It makes for a nice sidewalk tree planter area plant. It can be shaped up a little bit, kept as a round ball, or shaped up a little bit. Beautiful pink flowers, and bees love it. I dug out the plant that was here, and again, there are going to be some California small natives going in on this side right there, as I had to dig down, and the oak roots were really hard. That was 3 hours of digging to find the irrigation and hook into it down here. Then we also have to watch out for electrical and piping that goes back to my neighbors back here. And this is like also your TV, your phone, electrical, and water all go back to a home behind me. So I have to be careful on what trees. So I put in a willow tree earlier, but had to remove that because of the potential for roots. But I put in lavender, and this is what I call a roadside rose. A lot of highways will see this, but this is a rose bush that is a hybrid, that disease resistant, flowers all summer long, and looks gorgeous. Unfortunately, not as visited to bees as the single rose buds, but every once in a while we'll get some insects and bees on it. And then coming down, I put some fruit trees. I got some lime, some lemon, and a pluot, which the first 4 years was very productive, had wonderful, some of the best fruit I've ever had. Has not produced any fruit in 4 years now. The bees seem to completely miss it during flowering time now, between that and the frost that we've had. So I've had no fruit for about 4 years, but it's pruned back, and I have it pruned to be within a layer. So it's almost bonsai, so I'd have to trim the pop off and the sides. And you can see I can pull lemons off a fair amount of the time of the year, almost all year round. I've got a lemon on this plant, Meyer lemon. Lime tree, not as productive, is not frost tolerant or that drought tolerant, so it struggled for years, but I get a few limes off of it every year. Okay, coming into my backyard, I've got a couple of bins. I keep some compost from Sonoma Marin, always available in case I need to use that for planting. I keep some flats going, and here's my worm bin. So this is where we do the composting for the kitchen scraps go into here. And so I've got in here a whole bunch of stuff that I did, lots of little flies coming off, fruit flies, but underneath all that there's thousands of red worms for composting. Use scrap wood for building a little bench so I can work out here, do any potting I need to do, and keep everything down here on the side that I need whether it be cages for tomatoes, small, very light wheelbarrow for moving a few things around that instead of carrying it. I got my sticks for supports, everything, and then the green waste can, and everything is easily accessible in the yard by walking around. I put in raised beds over the lawn, and use the irrigation systems and put in a drip system in each of these boxes with gopher netting, actually the metal grate that's underneath each individual box. This box that's in the front here, I went ahead and put a trellis up there, and right now I've got some black-eyed Susan type of trellis plant that's growing pretty well on there, so I have green and color most of the year round. And then if you see the white bar, that's what I put a plastic over, and when I'm doing that in the early spring, so when it still could be frosty or it's a little cold, I put plastic over this entire thing and put my seeds and flats in here, so I can actually grow a lot of stuff much earlier in the season if I so wish. I didn't do a whole lot this year because of the COVID-19 situation, but this works really well for me just by draping it with plastic and just putting a cardboard on either end to kind of seal it up. Pretty easy to do, and I can lift it up and off, take the cardboard off, water it real easily, even set up an irrigation in it. At the end here I've got a line that comes in. I can convert over from drip to spray anytime. And then I've got a smaller box here that's a lot lower to the ground, but it's still easily accessible on both sides. And so I just put in a lot of vegetables in these over here. I use these two, just the last one and this one, for mostly vegetables, make it easy for picking, particularly looking at the long, tall one here. It's almost 3 foot tall, and so my wife can come on out, and she likes to harvest. I do all the planting and growing, and she likes to do the harvesting. So it's easy for her to harvest, come out here and just collect the lettuce right off the top and bring them on in for dinner. So having a tall raised bed can be very helpful for easy planting and also for easy harvesting. And coming back here in the garden, all around the garden I have put in some carpenter bee and mason bee type boxes of various sorts. I just used scrap wood and built these up and put these in, and so far none of them have been occupied. I probably have to clean this one up a little bit. You have to do that every year, but so far I haven't had much interest in them so far. Usually it takes a few years, but once they get started and get going, then these tend to fill up rapidly once the bees do arrive. I've got trellises with small beds here that I can, right now I've got an old sharp plant sitting in there, but I can either put flowerings in there, put beans, peas. So I keep a couple of these going here on the side. I've actually had 4 of them going between my trees. Peach tree that's now over 30 years old, on the decline, but still I'm keeping it because the peaches are still plentiful and is enough for us. So as long as it keeps producing, I'll keep it in, and then I'll probably put a different tree in there shortly, because slowly every year a few more branches die. We have a rhododendron that's about 25 years old, and it's just almost in full bloom now, but not quite, and so that's really gorgeous every year for about a month. In this box here I put in a seed pack of bee-friendly seed pack of just a whole variety of things, and I did that 3 years ago, and most of these plants just keep coming back every year. So there's a whole variety in here. We'll go through the list. It's just a standard bee pack. And then one of the things you have to be cautious about is some of the plants like to get weedy. Like I noticed the golden poppy tends to be weedy. Here's another one. Here's Foxglove. 2 years ago I planted like 3 or 4 of them in bed here, and right now you can see close to several hundred of them. Have all been from the seeds that were dropped and coming up, even though it's a biennial, so I still get plants coming up every year, and producing these lovely flowers that are here. Behind that, I just kind of leave the onions in ornamental. I leave the kale in, which is now yellow flowers. Leave that for the bees, which seem to come in. In fact, there's a little tiny little bee right up there right now. I don't know if you can see it or not. Everything. So these are like small bees and flies that come in and feed on it, and there's wasps. So here's another. There was a tiny little parasitic wasp up here I just saw. It's floating around. Let's see if I can catch it up here. But there's going to be, so you want to feed all the insects, not only the honeybees, but also native bees, the flies, the wasps, the parasitic wasps. I've got my weather station that's hooked up, and even though it's not the most perfect spot, but by having it up here, and it's called Ambient Weather Station, and it was reasonably cheap. It was under $300 for the entire setup, and it's a Wi-Fi system that goes inside the house, and I'm hooked into the web so anybody can come and see what my my weather data says. There's coral bells. Here's a white one. I thought it was pink when I planted it, but it's now white. And then I've got a bunch of pink ones, and they're in bloom for a couple months right about now. And they keep going and going for a while. And you see there's honeybees on it right now. I added in a toyon down here, and then coming around, I've got benches to sit, another bench to kind of sit under the shade here and do some reading whenever you want to do that. But I've got some 9 bark on this one that seems to be doing well. It needs a little bit of shading. So a combination of vegetables, spices, tomatoes, parsley, just in this garden here. And this side over here, I was able to put my feeders for the birds that come for the small birds up here. And locally, they prefer the whiter seed versus the black seed that you buy from a local store here by 25-pound bags. But they like that mix. That's a millet mix there. No sunflowers, but if I add sunflowers, they love that also. So I've got a bunch of birds, and I have a hooded oriole right now that's coming to my feeders. Nice to have those around. It's the most gorgeous bird. And then I've added in some planters just to add some little color into the yard. And then I keep this flowers and the like down here. And there's some more tomatoes and some chives. And added in trying to save a parsley plant. I've got my golden poppies, which started off with just being 1 or 2 plants earlier, but they spread like crazy, so I'm completely weeding these out and pulling them out and hoeing them out from all over this backyard. They pop the seeds and they go 6 feet. So 6 feet out from this bed, there's going to be 1,000 little seedlings every year, and I have to cut that back. I put some lavenders in for beekeepers. Love lavender, not only for the plant for the bees, but also you can use the flowers and use them in the boxes themselves. Then over here, I've planted a couple, there's roses in there, miniature roses, as well as standard roses that you see. Wife loves flowers, so we just pull those in once in a while. But I've got, I think, this is similar to Dudleya, a California native, that is in the very front. And some Yucca Plant that just someone gave me, I just put it in there just for fun. And then we grow on some other plants. Fuchsias, I'm trying to adjust the shade back here. So fuchsias seem to be doing much better. So now I've made this into a fuchsia garden. I've got 3 or 4. There's a fuchsia right now. Whoop, I'm trying to find it. There's a bumblebee right on the fuchsia just a second ago. And so Juga's doing well in here. And here is a California native. This is the monkey flower, and it's the yellow-orange little flowers on it, and they're just not quite almost flowering yet, but there's 1 or 2 flowers right there. But that's growing well in this shady spot, probably not as well as it could. I probably have to move that one out to the front yard where it's a little sunnier. Then in the I had put in a little teardrop shaped little planter back here, and just kept that full of like flowers and herbs and the like over the years. And here's another Spicebush that's does well in the shade area, nice big leaves in response to the shade. It comes back these big, gorgeous pink flowers that will last a fairly long time, over several weeks in midsummer. And here's over a 30-year-old camellia that I planted when I first moved in. And every year it just blooms like crazy, and I have blooms. It starts off with a plant next to it, which are pink, and now this one is red. And so I have it blooming all the way from almost December this year. I've had red blooms and camellias coming out, and it's just a solid green fence for me back here. I've got maple trees, the Japanese maple. Loves the little shade back here. My neighbors put in some crepe myrtles and other plants in the back, so this makes for a nice little forest in the corner to keep the four houses kind of nicely divided. And this plant is the acacia plant, and you can see some red flowers on it there. Bottle brush is another name for it. But this is full of bees almost all year round. As long as there's flowers on it, there is all sorts of bees, not only honeybees, the native bees, carpenter bees, bumblebees, small little bees, floating all over it. And there's several nests in there of Anna's hummingbird, and they'll still come out, and they'll come over. And so I've got some feeders up here, so every day I have my hummingbirds come and visit us. And have some roses. Again, that's we get to clip those and bring those in the house once in a while. Just have that. Again, a little teardrop. This is plants I just have been given, or I gave my wife over time, and leftovers, and well, let's just plant it out here. So I have gladiolas, I've got iris, and a few other bulb type plants that gifts turn into planting beds, and I just let them go and live here. And the rose bush is coming back. It's struggled there for the last year or two, but it's slowly coming back, and that's a beautiful rose that is a multicolored white and pink, and was a showcase for over 25 years. And then down here we've got my trellis of I've got the Clematis, and it's got a deep purple color, and right now it is in pretty much full bloom coming out. And then you can see, compare the two, the one that's in the sunshine tends to have a lot more blooms on it coming up, and the one that's in the shade has a little bit more foliage to garner a little bit more sun, everything. But also maybe a slightly wetter spot over here too. Maybe a little extra fertilizer, make it a green and foliage rather than flowers. Oh, and there's a bee floating around right now. And there we go. So that says I have a bee-friendly garden. They love my plantings. So then in the back area here, we'll back up a little bit, which you've probably noticed here on the side is this nice white things coming down from this little roof area here, which goes up to a larger roof up there, which comes down to the smaller roof here, which comes then across and down. You can see that I have a little leaf separator in there before it drains down to the bottom, a little pipe that comes along, and here's my rain catchment system, 500 gallons. It's about $1 a gallon for the cost of the tank, and then probably another $100 of parts to put it together and setting it up, and then had to put it on top of a base rock bed underneath it, just to support it so it doesn't sink and tip over or do weird things. But this is my emergency water in case of an earthquake, so it's out here. As well as I use half of it for small little jobs around. Especially later on, right around the corner, I've got some plants in pots, so I use this water in my little water cans here. I keep 4 or 5 just right around the corner, fill those up, and I do my my hanging baskets and my pots that I have with that all year round. Coming back here, this is Mugwort, a California native. You see it right by the rivers. It's a wild, weedy type of plant, but it has been used as a medicinal plant and as an herb in the past, especially by our Native Americans. So I just want to try it out as a landscape plant, and it does very well here in this little shady spot, as does the Japanese maple. Here's another 9-bark that's actually does better with a little bit of shade than it does in the heavy sunshine. And so I've been putting that back. Then I've got my little Zen garden back here. So pots, I tried to put a little, I can't have water. I want to put a waterfall on, but the noise tends to be disruptive. Sometimes it's really nice and sometimes it's too noisy, but I was able to get a water cascade feature type going, but all with plants, starting with something on a vine that comes from the back into a splash pot, a couple different ornamentals that I put in there, and on either side put some reeds there, and then some fuchsias. This one particularly, this fuchsia is 35 to 40 years old now. I had it and I brought it here from my prior dwelling and put it out here, and it produces some really gorgeous, and lasted through the period of time where the insects and mites and other diseases were hitting all the fuchsias really bad, but somehow it survived that period, and it's very productive. And then I've got another mimulus here. This is Scarlet monkey flower. Turns into a nice beautiful red flower, and that also cut roots from the ground. So it's a spreading type plant, but here in the shade it doesn't spread too badly. It's not that weedy. It's gorgeous, and I highly recommend it for shady or wetter areas. It's a wonderful plant. I come up with another Clematis, which is in bloom right now on this rack, with Epilobium, California fuchsia, which is more of a draping style that I was able to get out of this that pot. And right back here, which is in the front yard also, but this is even a better patch of it, is your California Aster. It's a tiny little blue flower that comes up, and very insect friendly. It is a spreader and can get very weedy. I know in the front yard I'm always have to hoe it out and cut it back, but I can keep it contained. Just keep it from the roots from spreading. It does not seed all that much, mostly spread by roots. And then I put in another couple plants back here. So, or if you go to Schollenberger Park, where I do a lot of volunteer work over there also. This is a giant gum plant, or Pacific gum plant. It has a couple different common names to it. Grandelia is its another name that's generic for genus names. That's also used as a generic name for it. And I've got 2 of them back here, and they do pretty well here in the shade. Not as well as they'd like. Prefer a little bit more sun, but they produce a nice yellow flower. Again, insects tend to love it. Another Spicebush in the back, and then I have my red stem dogwood here, and that's just really just goes like gangbusters here in the shady spot. Loves it. You can see the flowers are on it right now, and I have to prune this back every year from a massive growth that it puts out every single year. Really perfect in this corner. Now here's just another shot I didn't quite catch earlier, but I keep a single sprinkler head, keep the system on, and it waters the little rock in here. This is a basalt pillar rock that I was able to bury, and has a little pool on the top. So I get that filled with water every day, or I fill it every day, and the birds come and bathe in it every day. It's kind of really nice. And then I've got sedums in the front of it, and which is right here. They've done better in the past, but they're coming back. And here is some lemon thyme. So another little spice plant I put in here. And so if we need a little lemony thyme, we can just grab a few leaves and add it to some of our culinary dishes. Various irrigation systems that you can see. So coming from underground here, I've got a filter I put in at the edge down in here, and it comes up. So every bed has a valve on it, so I can turn it on and off if it's empty or full, and I turn that on and off. I've got it comes out to a drip systems that we can spread around the whole yard. So I do that and combine with whatever hand watering for the extra hot days. And then again, so every bed has this little bit of turnoff valve. Oh, and I did put in at nighttime you get your little solar lights in here, and so at nighttime I go walk outside without turning on the light. I can come outside and take out the trash, and have light all by my walkway all the way to my trash can, which I also have lights up here that also solar based little boxes up here. So my little pathway is lit from 9 o'clock at night to almost midnight. So anytime I take out the trash, I can find my way here at night. And then in the irrigation, here's just another, since I have multiple systems in here, I have 4 drips that come out of one little end, and that little adapter there, and that feeds both the pots, feeds that area there, and also feeds even the pots at the end. And the drip systems, they work up to about a 3-foot high level, but getting past a 4-foot high level, they don't have enough pressure to push the water up higher than 4 feet. So, so the pots I put them on the low end rather than on the high end. Oh, and here's a hummingbird visiting the plant right now that you can see. So I get birds coming in all day long. So my garden is lovely for bees, birds, and butterflies. And then on hoses, I like these little flexible new hoses that come out. They do restrict the water flow a little bit, so you don't get the full 10 gallons per hour per minute out of it, but they're flexible, they're light, easy to put in a container, and you don't have to roll them up so much, easy to move around the yard. So I'm really liking this new style hose. Next to that, I have my ornamental metal that I found when we went up to Oregon. Saw this in a nursery and said, let's go ahead and get it. And it's in a spot. We usually have plants back there, but it was really hard to keep anything alive in this pot where that used to sit. So hey, so now I get year-round color right outside my door by having an ornamental plant. Truly ornamental in metal. Here's another style hose. I like this one because it wraps up. It's short. It's only 25 foot long. It's low water using, only 2 gallons per minute is allowed to come out of the end. So I just use that for washing and cleaning out here, so I don't waste a lot of water. And it's easy to just kind of pop it down, and it kind of wraps itself up. So easy comes out of the way. It's not like this big hose you have to keep wrapping up every time you use it. So these new little hoses really are a help. This shows you a nice little sculpture. It's a couple birds hanging on the edge. It balances, blows in the wind a little bit, but I've got it supported next to the pot as it goes into the ground down here on the side, right there. But adding a little feature like that moves a little bit and is nature-based, it kind of adds a little highlight as people walk in and out. They can see this thing. And then when everybody comes to the front door, I like to have a little pot with flowers dripping over it, and I can take this one off, and I've got 4 in the back, so I can just move them back and forth as needed. So which ones looks the best, to put the best one by the front door. But it does require watering every day in the summertime. Come out here with a little bit of water. If I'm not out in the garden with the hose, then I've got to come out with a little pot from the kitchen.